I'm no Trump enthusiast, but I suggest that at the core of most Donald Trump platforms are very real issues. Acceptance of Trump's interpretation of these issues and/or his proposed solutions largely determines attitudes towards Donald Trump. But that so many people voted for him means something resonated with a significant number of voters. Issues behind Trump's immigration and climate policies are covered in other videos to be linked below, and this is on what's behind the tariff plan, which I see as the US trade deficit and the trend towards seemingly nothing being made in America and so much being made in China. While there are economists who say the US economy is the envy of the world and neither deficit nor offshoring are problems, but can the economy be strong in the US and many other Western countries when there's both a cost of living crisis and a housing crisis? Or is it that economic indicators don't tell the whole story? Chapters follow on the significance of the US trade deficit, offshoring, including my own experiences. Is China a cheat? And then a recap of events since part 1, followed on by how much pain and what's next. But first, what would make Trump a visionary rather than a populist? I initially struggled with the definition of populist, but have come to the conclusion that as someone who claims to have solutions to problems, the first step, becoming popular, is identifying issues that resonate with people. And this step carries most weight when voters feel the issues identified are real for them despite being ignored by others, such as an economy that doesn't feel as good as is being claimed. It has to be what people want to hear, and despite those conventionally qualified agreeing that either the problem or the proposed solution are just fantasy, seen as credible, or for people to be sufficiently desperate to try anyway. Unlike a snake oil salesman who doesn't themselves believe their remedy will work, many, including I suggest Donald Trump, do believe they can actually deliver, which, if he does, would make him a visionary rather than the populist his detractors claim if he fails. For tariffs, the underlying issue needing to be addressed is living standards, with the US trade deficit being cited as damaging to the cost of living because spending more on trade than you earn from trade logically must reduce American wealth. The counter-argument from economists or others with credibility in finance is you can continue gaining wealth while spending more than you earn, provided the value of your assets keeps growing fast enough. And in the time America has gained the most wealth, it's had a trade deficit that's helped the value of US assets increase. The argument is that the US trade deficit has helped the US get rich. In some ways, similar to how tech companies can achieve multi-billion-dollar valuations before even making a profit, just in perpetuity. However, even if this has held true so far, the reliance on perpetual growth of the US asset base troubles me and reminds me of a quote. Anyone who believes in indefinite growth in anything physical on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist. As I'm not an economist, I can see why people believe there is a real issue here, and I can also see reasons, like the emergence of robots, as to why now is a time when manufacturing could return to countries like the USA. I don't see jobs on the production line as the issue, but the ecosystem around manufacturing. I see manufacturing as a symptom of a bigger trend that is not limited to just impacting the manufacturing itself. The production line isn't where the jobs are anymore anyway, which is one of the reasons the migration of jobs offshore is moving up the food chain. From the very early offshoring in the 1970s, the opening up of China in the 1980s, to the big shift of the 1990s, and the rise of Southeast Asia into 2000s, the offshore migration of manufacturing to China and other low-cost locations has reduced prices of manufactured goods, and I would argue masked an underlying lack of real economic progress in Western economies, an effect only now seen with cars and only seen outside the US.
The headlines? More range, more equipment, more tech, higher quality, and all for just £2,000 less.
Particularly from the 1990s, there have been price savings across the board, from appliances like washing machines to electronics and even clothing. Where would the cost of living be now without the price savings that have flowed from the offshoring of manufacturing? Henry Ford famously produced cars his factory workers could afford because a well-paid factory worker was representative of the mass market of volume customers. Offshoring was launched with low-cost labour that didn't need the buying power to afford the products because the products were destined for a wealthier country. I spent a couple of years parachuted into a general manager role in a struggling electronics producer that had committed to the process of offshoring manufacturing in order to survive in a market where some competitors had already made those cost savings. Joining those offshoring was necessary to compete, but the company was not ready to adjust thinking from a manufacturer that also does design, development, marketing and sales to a design and development company that also does marketing and sales, but can no longer consider manufacturing as one of its sources of profit. There was legacy thinking that with lower manufacturing costs, they could increase profits, seeming to forget that competition also had those same savings, and the result was falling prices with manufacturing profits also offshored. But there was a bigger problem, because it didn't stop at manufacturing, with the offshore suppliers already promoting their developing skills in design and development, that should lead to a death spiral of cuts and outsourcing for any manufacturer until all they did was sales and marketing, and then eventually face competition for imports by businesses built on the scale of combined volume from outsourcing to companies from all over the world. Is China cheating? There are claims that China is so competitive all because of subsidies and or it's being done below cost. And while I'm not really sure that China is subsidising purchases made by the West, it's really academic because they would now have a scale and logistics advantage anyway. That means even preventing cheating wouldn't be enough. China achieved huge scale for manufacturing on the back of cheap labour at the time globalisation really opened up. Because manufacturing went from national in a variety of countries to one country manufacturing for nearly the whole world and at a scale far beyond prior in-country manufacturing. That scale enables them to maintain logistics and lower prices than anyone unable to replicate the same scale. In other words, without tariffs or some new breakthrough, it becomes like trying to compete with Google or Facebook. Now they're already so far in the lead. How much progress there's been so far depends to some extent on whether you view Trump blinked or not. To first recap, since Liberation Day tariffs discussed in part 1, the market tanked. There was a rumour all but the tariffs on China would be paused for 90 days, causing a recovery spike before a return to values falling. Trump then declared it was a great time to buy just hours before announcing all Liberation Day tariffs, other than those on China, would fall to 10%, with pre-Liberation Day tariffs on Canada, Mexico, steel, aluminium to remain, plus all foreign cars at the 25%. Tariffs are, on average, at the time of recording, higher than any time since 1938 and the Great Depression, but I believe no longer higher than even in 1938. There are really only two options for why Trump backed off. Either he flinched, or it was always part of a plan and events only impacted timing. Choosing depends on how you apply confirmation bias on interpreting the tea leaves. But key tea leaves are: 1, that the rumour was so close to the truth, which could mean anything from planning or advanced discussion of backing off to an educated guess or deliberate leak to see if a rumour alone would be sufficient to calm things. 2, there were many calling for a pause. 3, the US bond market that zigged when in theory it should have zagged, suggesting a potential finance catastrophe. That last one is huge. There are investments considered safe havens, which normally include gold and US bonds, and flight away from US bonds suggests investors losing faith in the US to meet its debts, which can be self-fulfilling. Still, nothing definitive about whether Trump blinked or not. And the answer when asked why, because people were getting a bit yippy, supports a blink, or at least the timing. While advising great time to buy just hours before the announcement can be seen as something he would have not done if it was already decided, or indicating it was already decided, depending on your opinion of Trump, with the twist being believing he did not blink means believing that great time to buy declaration was intentional advance notice to provide immoral financial rewards to his followers. It could be solved by going back to full national protectionism, but as covered in Who Pays, without some huge breakthrough, that would bring far more pain to living standards. While robots and AI could one day provide the breakthrough needed to avoid the pain, they're just not there yet, and they bring other, potentially even bigger challenges. Trump succeeding in these goals should be desirable, but Trump's actions may result in too many people not even wanting him to succeed, which would make it very difficult to make any solution workable. Trump may deserve kudos for facing up to very real problems that others apply confirmation bias and deny. But how he is seen will be judged on whether the US economy can handle the pain of his solutions, or the solutions are at all workable. If Trump fails, the problems remain. Who Pays and the Pain of Strategy options are videos to follow.